Hello and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. Today I will be introducing Uma Girish. Uma is a spiritual mentor for women who have experienced deep loss, but know that there's a deeper purpose to their lives. She guides them on their journey from pain to purpose so that they can create a life of peace and contentment. Uma is a Hay House author, and 2 of her books were finalists in the Chicago Book Awards. Her work with clients involves both one-to-one and small group formats. Uma believes that her clients are their own healers, and her role is to serve as a guide on their journey. Uma is a very special soul, and I look forward to sharing her work with you. So let's meet Uma. Uma, welcome. Thank you very, very much for being here. And I'm excited to share your work with everybody. I discovered you quite sort of by randomness, I guess. I was Googling the term conscious grief and conscious grieving and found your podcast, which led me to contacting you and learning more about you. So I'm very honored to have you here and to talk about this concept of conscious grief.
It's lovely to be here, Tara. I love having these conversations. So I just want to take a moment to honor you for creating this space and for inviting me into this space.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, you're actually based in Germany right now, but you have lived in the US and you're from India originally. Mm-hmm. And your story is sort of quite linked to the US of grief. And so I was wondering if you'd like to share your grief around your mother and that time when you were in America to get us started today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband, my daughter who was 15 at the time, and I relocated from India to Chicago in the spring of 2008. And 8 weeks after we had moved, my mother in India was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. So very shortly, I got on a plane and I went back to India to be with her when she was getting her chemo treatments, because my husband said, if you don't go now, you don't want to look back on this time and regret something. And I don't know why he said that. He's not someone who speaks things, which when you look back on what he said, it was so true, but he's not someone who says things like that. And he just felt guided to tell me that. So of course I got on a plane and I went back. I spent 6 weeks with my mother in India. And when I left India, I didn't know that that was the last time I would be seeing her, because she died 8 months after her initial diagnosis. So the next trip I made to India was for her last rites. Mm-hmm. Now, me being in Chicago and me being such a new immigrant, not knowing anybody, I didn't have any friends. I was just about learning how to drive. It was my first Midwestern winter. It was the most challenging circumstances to experience such a personal loss. And I just was blindsided. I didn't know what grief felt like until it happened to me. I mean, I'd lost grandparents. My grandmother, who I was very close to, died when I was 14, and she died in our home. Being in India, I was very familiar with this idea of death and dying. But my mother's death was perhaps the most painful I'd encountered. And so being in a country where I didn't have friends, I didn't have people I could talk to, nothing was familiar. The whole cultural context was completely strange to me. And that sort of made my grief experience so much harder.
Mm. And it's also quite interesting that the grieving in 2 different cultures as well.
Yes, that's right. In India, so when I went back for her last rites, I stayed for 2 weeks because the rites and rituals that are performed when a person dies, they are about, yeah, 2 weeks long. And then there's a whole year of mourning. So that whole year, the family, the close family, does not celebrate any festivals. There are no weddings that happen. It's sort of the period of mourning, and nothing happy or celebratory happens during that 1 year. The family takes that year off just to remember the person who passed away. And every month, in fact, we have sacred rites and rituals that we perform for the passage of the soul from the material realm to the spirit realm. So, in the absence of all of that, being in the United States, it was so hard for me because I felt like this framework, this beautiful sacred structure that I would have had I been in India, was suddenly ripped away from me. And I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know how to grieve in the absence of community. I had always had extended family, friends, even neighbors, because everyone in India, at least the India I left behind, it's been a while now. It's been 12 years since we moved away. But back then, we were very supported when we went through any kind of a personal loss. And not having that structure was perhaps the hardest thing for me when it came to navigating the territory of loss in a foreign country as a brand new immigrant.
Absolutely. And it sounds very profound. There's the rituals that you do in India and how devoid of that we really are in the UK and the US. So tell me, Uma, because I know that the death of your mother led to a awakening of some kind, even though you have this influence and your culture in India, and you talk about the soul passage and so on and so forth, but it took your mother dying to sort of really go deeper into this. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So I remember one image very distinctly. When she died, my brother lived in Chicago, but we'd had a falling out for several years. And so when my mother died was the time when we started sort of coming together and repairing the rift between us. So when we traveled back and her body was brought to her home, because the last journey to the crematorium happens from the home where the person died. So the daughters usually have to perform the last rites when it's the mother. So the priest was giving us instructions, and my sisters and I washed her body and we bathed her and we draped her body in this beautiful silk sari. We rubbed turmeric paste on her cheeks. We placed a rose garland on her body. And as I stepped back after performing these rituals, it suddenly occurred to me, we come into this world with nothing and we leave with nothing. Why do we spend all our time here chasing after stuff, acquiring and accumulating and growing more and more and more in terms of how much we own and possess? Most of our energy seems to go towards that. And yet, all that my mother was taking with her on her final journey was that one silk sari that she was draped in. And that really was the beginning of my transformational journey. That's the first question my soul served up to me. And that was followed by a series of thoughts like, who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? How am I meant to serve? What do I really focus on? What truly matters in this life that I'm living? And I would lie awake at night in, thinking about all these profound big life questions and these cosmic questions to which there are no simple answers. It's only through the living of life, when you've been dropped into the crisis, that you really begin to wake up to the answers. And there are no answers. There are no final conclusive answers. The answers just keep deepening as you live more deeply into the questions. So that became the beginning of my transformational journey, because I had lived in India until I was 44 years old. And terms like soul and reincarnation and death and dying were very commonplace in my family. They were part of conversations. Elders often talked about these things, but I had never really been interested. I grew up in the 80s when satellite television was new in India, and we were being exposed to American shows and Western TV. And for me, the whole idea of being an independent woman and having my own thoughts and beliefs and opinions on life mattered so much to me that I was trying to sort of break away from the Eastern way of doing things, right? It's always you want what you don't have. It's like yoga is so popular in the West, and women in India want the independence of Western women. And that's what I was moving to. But when my mother died is when all of this started to make sense. Oh, yeah, we come here for a purpose. This is not a random accident that we're just born. And we are meant to be of service while we're here. We're meant to embrace the consciousness of love. All of these things began to open up in me after she died. But that was the distinct moment that I remember so vividly.
Very, very powerful. And I really identify with that, that feeling of we're here, we spend all this time creating and accumulating, and then we can't take it with us, and it's all meaningless, all the things, all the accumulation of material possessions. And it is profound how death can wake us up, be a great awakening. And obviously that has then put you onto a whole trajectory of writing 3 books and creating your whole work around assisting other people in their awakening and deepening their experience of themselves and life. And I was thinking, for the people who are listening who are in the very early stages of grief right now, what kind of things in your early experience of grief did you find helpful? Obviously, you went on to this deep search for meaning, I suppose. Are there anything that you would like to share with people who are really feeling a lot of pain and suffering in this moment?
Yeah, I want to be careful as I answer that question that grief is such an intensely personal journey that what works for one may not work for the other. And so every exploration is as individual as the person going through loss. For me, what really helped was finding a community of grievers. Now, remember, I am from India, born and raised in a community model, in a context where we leaned on each other, we asked for help, we supported one another. And so in the absence of that, the first thing that I craved was community. So I walked into a church where these loss of support, the support groups, different kinds of support groups were meeting. I think it was a Friday evening, but there was a loss of child group, there was a loss of parent group, there was a sibling loss group, and I found my way to this loss of parent group. And sitting around that table and talking to other men and women who were grieving the loss of a parent felt so meaningful to me, because I really felt, wow, you guys get me. You guys know what I'm going through because you guys are going through the same thing. And in that moment of recognition of our common humanity and this big loss that we were all moving through, there was such a feeling of being held. There was such a feeling of belonging, which is what I was craving, not being in India anymore. The second thing I did to help myself is that because of all the philosophical cosmic questions that were churning inside of me, I felt the need to work with a spiritual mentor. Mm-hmm. And so I started asking the question, and someone I worked with, a friend of mine, said, I know someone who can probably help you with this. Would you be willing to talk with him? And the person I talked to, his name is Randy. He's still a very, very dear friend of mine. He was open to welcoming this Hindu and exploring the big life questions using books, using his own Christian background. And I worked with him for almost 2.5 years, just trying to understand what is the soul? Why do we come here? What is the purpose of this life? How do we embrace the seemingly opposite concepts of the material realm versus the spiritual realm, right? We have to live here and in these human bodies that feel emotions, that don't want to forgive, that get angry with other people and want to hold grudges. But we are also meant to be, we are also these beings of love and light. How do we marry these two opposing concepts? It was very useful for me to be in this deep dive learning mode with this person, because he helped open my mind and heart to so many different ways of looking at things, shifted my perspective, helped me with some healing rituals that I was able to do as a way of forgiving myself for not being with my mother when she died, which was a big, it was a source of guilt, because I'd been with her all those years and then I moved away and 8 months later she died. So I had a lot of guilt to work through. So working with this person was another thing that helped. The third thing is, I have always given myself permission to cry and feel what I need to feel. Maybe it was part of growing up in India. Maybe it was part of growing up in a family where emotions were not frowned upon. My mother cried easily, so we had permission to cry easily. And so I cried a lot. I cried and cried and cried. And my husband, I remember, asked me, when are you going to stop crying? You cry so much. And I said, I don't know. I guess I'll keep crying as long as I need to cry. I really don't know when I'll stop crying. So that was number 3. I cried a lot. Number 4, I actually wanted to use my pain to serve other people. And this wasn't, so I want to be careful when I say this, because so many people use volunteering as a way to escape what they need to feel. And that's not very useful, because when the volunteering is done, you're still sitting with all these unfelt emotions. So for me, I wanted to be with people who are in pain, who are dying, who are struggling through loss, as a way to say, I hear you because I'm going through the same thing. And maybe you can hold my hand and I can hold yours and we can cry together as one human holding space for another. That was my intention. So I trained to become a hospice volunteer. I worked with seniors in nursing homes. For about 1.5 years, all I did was volunteer. All I did was serve, because I wanted to understand this thing called death and dying, and understand how I was experiencing it, how others experience it, and then also find out a way to create more beauty out of the pain that I was so deeply feeling at the time.
Yeah, how did you create more beauty?
So every night when I went to sleep, if I went to sleep knowing that me taking up real estate on the planet had been a source of strength or comfort or solace to someone else, that was a day well spent. I had created beauty in someone's heart. I had shifted a perspective. I had let them know that they were not alone. I was able to hold space and listen to someone who just needed a listening ear. I was able to hug somebody and offer physical comfort to someone who was starved of love. And all of those instances helped me remember and realize that this is what you do with pain. You just create a little more beauty, a little more love in the world as a result of what you felt.
I absolutely love that. And it's making me think about when I start my grief groups, I say to everybody, there's going to be weeks when you don't want to come and you don't want to hear other people's grief. You don't want to feel your own grief. But keep in mind that you coming to the group is not just for you. You're coming for the other people as well, because you don't know what you're going to share is going to help somebody else. And so sometimes we kind of feel more motivated to attend if we feel like we're going to be of service to somebody else. And adding to the beauty, just seeing the small things in our daily life that we can be grateful for, and sharing those within the group, and we have a text message group as well that people share on, and it just helps elevate everybody. It really does. This community aspect that you're talking about, which is so key for healing and grief, I believe.
I completely agree, because even if you're sitting in that group and you feel, I haven't had any major shifts, I'm just feeling like a messed up person right now. And as you're sharing, you say, well, today I was on a walk and I was really able to take in this beautiful flower on the path. And for those 3 seconds that I was with that flower, I was able to tune into joy. If you say that, and somebody sitting in that group who's probably 2 days into mourning a loss hears that and thinks to themselves, okay, there's hope for me. She's further along the road, not that grief progresses in a linear way, we know that. But even so, just hearing someone say that despite my pain, I was able to come alive for 3 seconds, chancing upon a flower on my path, gives someone hope. You never know. Maybe it is that someone saying, I was able to get out of bed and wash my hair today. And someone who's not able to even crawl out of bed, for whom it is still a struggle, is really inspired by that simple act shared by somebody else. You never know the power of what you say. Your job is not to figure out whether what you're saying has any value or whether it's helping or inspiring someone. We live in the age of comparisonitis, and it's really hard to step away from comparing what we are doing with what everybody else is doing. But I think the real learning is show up as you and just let it be. Just let your spirit shine. You don't have to figure out whether you are helpful, you are inspiring. That's for other people to take away. You just have to be you.
I think that is a really wonderful, wonderful words of advice, because a lot of the time we can be listening to somebody else share and think, oh, what am I going to say? And how am I going to sound articulate and helpful? And the most important thing is to be very authentic and truthful and speak from our hearts, because like you say, we may say something that sounds ridiculous, but it can be very profound and helpful for somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I also spent some time in India, and I was so struck by the community, just the way the life is. Everything is communal, and the way that they would wash their hair in the street or have their beard shaved, their hair cut, everything was like on the pavement in front of one another. And I was so struck by that, and how we have become like in our gated houses and with the doors shut and the alarm systems on, and almost the more sort of privileged we become, the more isolated we become, and it's a sad thing, really. And we can learn so much from leaning on one another, asking for help. I think that's something that's really, really difficult for people in certainly for me. I definitely felt like asking for help was something I had to learn and build a lot of courage to do, and that people feel like they have to do things on their own and struggle on their own and figure it out on our own, and it's not the case. It's not the case. And like we're in a strange city in a strange country, And somehow you found a church full of people with groups with all varying losses specifically. So that was really a magical thing right there.
Yes, it was a 9-week group, I still remember, and they saved my life. I couldn't have done grief on my own. And I know it's different for different people, but I think my value in community, because I grew up in India and I did everything in community in the context of other people, it just made me crave community when I was so lost in the fog of grief. And one of the things that struck me almost as soon as we moved into our apartment in Chicago, before we found a home and everything, bought a townhome, was how people just drove into their garages and that was it. There was no communication amongst neighbors. I found it to be utterly alienating because in India, I would step out of my apartment door, and if my neighbor happened to be, standing outside or she was going out somewhere, we just stand there and have a 15-minute impromptu conversation. You ran into people all the time. I mean, India has such a big population that you can't not run into people. Even if you didn't want to, you couldn't avoid people. So you just had conversations very spontaneously on the spur of the moment. And India may not have a lot in terms of, the conveniences that living in the Western world offers. India still struggles with poverty and illiteracy and so many other disadvantages. But I think India's strength is its community, is that people will rush in if you need support in any way. And that's something I miss sorely to this day. I've had to learn how to go to not asking for help, which is so hard for me. Isn't that strange? Like for you, asking for help is so difficult. And for me, not being able to ask for help is so difficult because I know I can't do everything on my own. I know that. I've embraced that belief. So now to suddenly say, okay, this is a country where you're supposed to do it yourself. And so I have to do this. I have to figure out a way to do this myself. Oh, it's extremely stressful, let me tell you.
It is so stressful. Yeah, when it's crazy that we feel like we're going to be, we impinge on people's time. Even I feel like these days we don't call one another because you think, oh, well, they're probably going to be busy. So I'll text first. And then we have to now arrange a time to have a conversation. And now we used to just call each other and have a conversation and ask how each other are. And now we feel that that's like an imposition, which is really...
An Indian friend who lives locally in Düsseldorf, she just called me at 11 this morning and she said, hey, are you doing something or can you talk? And I said, no, I was just putting stuff away in the kitchen. I'm happy to talk to you. That can wait. And it was just so nice because she didn't text me and say, when are you free? Can we set up a time to chat? She just picked up the phone and called me. And I was so happy for that moment of, spontaneity that we just ended up having a lovely 20-minute chat.
There you go. You inspire me to just make more impromptu phone calls and not worry about scheduling everything in. And right. Absolutely. And I know the title of your book has the word Amma, your mother. And I was curious about how you continue your relationship with your Amma.
I was speaking to her just this morning. It's been how many years since she died? She died in 2009, so about 12 years since she died. But she's been my angel and guide on the other side. So often when I'm doing my meditation, I'll call upon her and ask her to help me. I'll ask for specific signs and she comes through. When I see the sign of a heart, I know it's her. And so when I'm in confusion or doubt or I'm struggling with a decision, I'll say, please come through as a sign, as a heart sign to let me know I'm moving in the right direction or that I should go ahead and do this thing that I'm thinking about. And she'll often help me. I'll either see a cloud in the sky in the form of a heart, or, I'll see a picture on Instagram, or, there'll be a pebble in my path in the shape of a heart. There's or some child would have drawn, a heart shape with chalk. It's just magical how your loved ones on the other side continue to support you when you ask them. But I think it's up to us to ask for help and to build that relationship in a different way. So when my grief was very raw and fresh, I would just cry to her and I would say, I don't know how I'm going to get by without you. This seems so hard. And I don't know when I'm going to feel okay. And it feels like there are so many things to do, so many responsibilities, but I just feel like I have no energy to do anything. And, even just the act of speaking with her, continuing to communicate with her spirit, sort of helped calm me down. I would find a measure of peace in that moment that I spoke with her spirit. Or I would say to her, come to me in a dream. And that night I'd have a dream about her. So it's really up to us to continue to keep that relationship alive. We have to find a way to build that relationship, human form to spirit.
That's so helpful. And when you were sharing and you were talking about the hearts, I was thinking, when I chose this sweater today, I was like, this is the one I'm going to wear for Uma. And it's got little hearts on. So
I'm telling you, they are just magical in the way they do these things. I mean, it's amazing. It amazes me every time.
It really
the fact that I tell her story through the book, so many people know about Amma and her story. She was a very humble, modest homemaker. She never worked outside the home a single day of her life. So if you look at today's world and what we think of success and celebrity and following and all of that, my mother was the most ordinary mortals among mortals, okay? But today her story has inspired so many, because I really feel that her soul and my soul entered into a contract that I would be transformed after she died, and then tell her story in order to inspire others. So never, ever consider that your life is a waste or that it's too small or it doesn't matter, because you never know. You never know how you're going to inspire other people.
You never know, exactly. And I think that, like you shared it at the beginning of this conversation, how everybody's life matters. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a purpose for being here, and it's no mistake. And that's such a powerful message in itself that you are teaching people and imparting to people. And would you like to share a little bit more about the groups that you're facilitating at the moment?
Yes. So when my mother died and I went on this transformational journey, I found that purpose and meaning were the things that got me through my grief experience. Understanding and finally opening to the idea that pain isn't personal, that we don't have pain because there's some punishing universe that's out to get us. Every human being, everything that breathes will die. Finally moving into an acceptance of that, and that we don't get to say when a loved one dies. It just happens. We don't know why they die when they do. I mean, we can talk about soul contracts. That's a whole other conversation. But for me, it became very clear that knowing pain and being broken open by pain was a very purposeful thing. I became more of who I was. Today, I'm much more than who I used to be 10, 12 years ago, because I have been broken open by pain. And so teaching women or holding space for women on how to navigate the journey of grief and loss to get to a place of meaning and purpose and create a life that matters, that is meaningful, is what makes me come alive. And that's one of the groups that I do. It's called the Soul Purpose Sisterhood. I'll be doing a new group in March of 2022. So that's just a small group of 10 women who come together. These are women who've known deep pain, but also know that there's a deeper purpose to their lives. And we work through incompletions and forgiveness and getting clear about soul values and what matters and where your time and energy are going. So it's a beautiful 6-month experience. And then one of the things that happened when my transformation happened is that my husband didn't get it. He didn't understand who I had become as a result of my mother's death. And so walking a different soul path, when your partner doesn't get what you're doing, who you've become, why this is important to you, that's a different kind of grief too. There's a loss of communication in the relationship, the dynamic in the marriage changes. And so I created a new group called Sacred Soul Union for women who are walking a soul path but are in long-term partnerships or a marriage with a spouse who doesn't get to understand their journey, doesn't validate or support their journey and understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so we work through how to embrace who you are and how to begin to stick to your lane and walk your path without expecting your spouse to validate you or love you for who you've become. Because in some ways, that is a very, very difficult and frustrating journey, because every human being has a need to be seen. Mm. And you want to be seen for your soul essence. When you are living this life of purpose and meaning and helping other people, and your husband looks at you and goes, I don't know who you are anymore. We live in a world where we have to pay our bills and pay taxes and be responsible and do things, But here you're talking about souls and grief and reincarnation and journeys, and I don't understand what you're saying. And that's a different kind of, you learn how to become more of who you are, but learn to give yourself the love and the validation that you so richly deserve. At the same time, validating their path for not being able to walk with you on this journey. So that's the second group called Sacred Soul Union. Yeah. So these are the 2 groups that I do. I also facilitate a Heal Your Mother Wound group for women who've had difficult relationships with their mothers. This is for women whose mothers are alive and those who've lost their mothers. But this is such a primal relationship, the mother-daughter relationship. And if there's some unfinished business in that space, it can really deeply impact how you show up, what you believe, the experiences you call into your own life. So I've created this group mainly to address this very important subject of generational healing. Yeah.
I think that's also so profound, the grief in that, not having the mother that you wish that you had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such a loss of safety, support, validation from a very young age. I mean, what do you do when you're 4 years old and you have an abusive mother, you have an emotionally unavailable mother? That child doesn't get to make sense of what's happening until much later. And all the trauma that they have sort of, grown up with. Yeah. They have to make sense of it. So I really feel very, very called to work with women who've had these kinds of relationships with their mothers.
There was so much profound work that you're doing and that you have done, and this incredibly, conscious communities that you are creating. And I'm so grateful to have met you. I feel like the time goes so quickly when I talk to you. It's extraordinary. I wanted to just ask you, even though we are at time, is there anything else that you would like to share with people before we close?
I often like to say there's nothing wrong with you. You are enough. You are whole. It's safe to feel all your feelings. It's okay not to rush through what you're grieving. It's okay to take your own time. It's okay to be fully you and know that your worthiness is a given.
Beautiful. Oh, Uma, thank you very, very much for being here. And I will have a link underneath this video for people to check out more of your work and your groups. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Tara. It's such a pleasure chatting with you. I feel like you and I can talk for hours and hours, and maybe someday we will.
Yeah, in person. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. And to everybody that's watching, thank you very much. Bye-bye.